Ladies and gentlemen, while there is increasing emphasis on the implementation of cleaner transportation solutions, declining oil prices since 2014 have kind of put a dent in that drive. They've increased the economic challenges involved in developing alternative fuels. Our first panel today will discuss the role of the regulator, the challenges and the opportunities of this new environment. Moderating the panel and introducing its members is the co-director of the Institute for the Analysis of Global Security and a senior advisor to the United States Energy Security Council. And here she is, Anne-Corinne. Welcome.
Thank you, and let me call up my panel first. Dr. Patrick Ho, Secretary General of the China Energy Fund Committee. And Giovanni DeSanti, Dr. Giovanni DeSanti, who is Director of the Institute for Energy and Transport at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. And Dr. Veit Steinel, who is Director General for Policy Issues at the German Federal Ministry of Transport and Digital Infrastructure. All right. Well, let me start first by saying I was very, very excited to meet Professor Goodenough. I met him earlier before he spoke because some years back my colleague Gelufta and I actually wrote about him and one of the battery chemistries he developed in our book, Turning Oil into Salt. So that was very personally exciting for me. The speakers on this panel have a great deal of experience on regulatory issues and on energy issues. Patrick over here, for example, was Home Secretary of Hong Kong, and you're actually a real Renaissance man because in addition to being an accomplished musician, he's also a medical doctor, ophthalmologist, right?
Yeah, the people see.
Yeah, so I contend that if Patrick went over to Syria and spoke to Assad, we'd probably have a much better situation, two ophthalmologists speaking eye to eye, so to speak. But that's not our issue today. Our issue is energy. And what I want to start with actually is, since we have two Europeans on the panel, one from Germany, one from the European Commission, you know that we just have to talk about the VW diesel scandal. Well, but I want to approach it from a little bit of a different angle. Let me ask you gentlemen first if one of you wants to quickly explain what happened with VW or if I should do it. Should I just do it quickly and then we can get into the questions?
Yes, you do it.
All right. Well, VW was faced with two constraints, actually. On the one hand, it had to make sure that its vehicles reduced NOx emissions. And on the other hand, it was striving to show good performance as well as high fuel economy for its vehicles. And what it did is for its 2009 to 2014 vehicles, the way that it dealt with NOx, which is unlike how it deals with it from 2015 on, the way that you deal with NOx at that time was to divert a little bit of the fuel into a special vessel. A little bit of the fuel wasn't combusted in the combustion chamber. It was diverted into a little vessel and used to burn up the NOx. Now, if you diverted sufficient fuel, you burnt up a lot of NOx. But you hurt your fuel economy, obviously, because that fuel wasn't being used to move the vehicle forward. What VW did is that for the purposes of testing the vehicle sensed when it was under a testing regime. And when that happened, it diverted more fuel into the NOx chamber. And so its NOx emissions were low. These are smog-causing emissions. But when it wasn't in a testing situation, not enough fuel was diverted into the NOx chamber, and therefore fuel economy was higher and the vehicle performance was higher. That's basically what VW did. So the question I want to ask both of you to start with is, we're seeing a situation in which regulators place a lot of constraints, different constraints on automakers, for example, and they have to optimize to many different constraints. And obviously that has a penalty sometimes in terms of cost, sometimes in terms of performance. And the question is, how do we know when, first of all, when we're placing too many constraints on an automaker or on any regulated body? And second, from a European perspective and from a specifically German perspective, What is more important, clean air or good fuel economy?
I have the privilege now to answer. Okay. Both, I would say.
Both.
Both, yes. I need clean air, but I also need that they have a lower consumption and that they don't, that I can reduce the CO2 emissions. And that's what I would say. We now do the investigations, how it could happen. That's the one thing, and we also have legal investigations. And I would say, perhaps a little bit ironically, it's tricky what they have done. Okay. But normally it's like this. If, for example, V4 would drive a normal internal combustion car, a vehicle with an internal combustion engine, I would say all V4 here and all the people here who would drive a car, we would have all different CO2 emissions. I think that's a problem, because I can't do it in real driving conditions. That's normally the problem, because everybody of us would drive otherwise.
But if you had to choose between reducing CO2 and reducing pollutants that harm human health, which would you choose as more important? If you can't have a reduction that you would like in both, which is more important from a German perspective?
I think both.
And from a European Commission perspective?
Well, let's say I wouldn't pose the question like this. I think that, as you know, we have different targets ahead. One, of course, is fuel economy, which means, again, resilience of energy system, which means to make a decarbonized transport system, which means also economy benefit. That's for sure climate change. So this is a long-term target that we always have to put in ahead of us. This is something which we need to achieve via different means. So energy efficiency, so as we said already, improved technologies, different social acceptability, so different behavior. So I think that transport as such is possibly the most difficult sector at the moment in the society to achieve this kind of economy, fuel economy. And that's why, as I agree with the precedent speakers, we need to go through a kind of revolution, not only technology. So we need some new technologies, electrified or biofuel or hydrogen, gas, whatever, but we do need something new. Otherwise, transport as such will remain a problem. From, again, this kind of fuel economy, CO2 emission, whatsoever. But on the other side, of course, the local pollutions have to remain on top of our priority. We never compromise with the quality of the air, because in the end, it makes no sense to improve, let's say, fuel economy if we have to emit more local polluting emissions. So, but we are very much convinced that we can both attain the two targets, because again, there are now technologies available to avoid NOx emission. So it's not true that if you do increase NOx, you need to, it's not, let's say, a kind of, there is a trade-off, okay, but technology is there to allow both NOx limits and CO2 reduction. Of course, with a certain limit, but there are technologies, as used also by some manufacturers, that they do not have NOx emission beyond the limit, and they do have also respected the CO2 emission limit. So I think we should not see as a kind of dualism. You know? Of course, there are some limits in the kind of, we need to find, in the end, a trade-off between the two, but it's not that it's not impossible to attain them both.
The reason I asked you, and it was kind of a leading question, and the reason I asked you is because we also have somebody who can talk a little bit about what's happening in China on the panel. And I think this trade-off between air quality and CO2 emissions might actually be very real in certain parts of the world. Because air quality is very good in Europe overall. I mean, even the latest emission standard just improved a situation that was already quite good. But if we look at China, air quality is very, very bad. Very bad. And so in China, if you look at the trade-off between CO2 emissions and air quality, you can actually improve air quality a great deal using coal-based transportation fuels, though that increases CO2 emissions.
Well, Anne, I know where you're driving at, but I must protest. This is not a fair question because the two is intertwined, it's interconnected. Plus, you said, do we want cleaner air? Of course, we all want cleaner air. But what do you mean by cleaner air? CO2 does not equate to cleaner air. CO2 is global warming. It does not make air any cleaner or dirtier. What really pollutes the air is not CO2. It's NOx, it's a COx, it's a carbon monoxide, it's the PM 2.5. These are the things that really are deleterious to your health. They will cause you diseases, lungs problems, and health trouble. But not CO2. CO2 is for the future generation to care. So if you want to talk about sustainable transportation, then you care about CO2. But if you want to talk about smart transportation and energy economy, forget CO2.
Focus on clean air.
Focus on clean air and focus on PM 2.5.
So that's the man on the street in China and the Chinese government. Focus on clean air.
That's true. For example, in Beijing, the average day, on the average day, the PM 2.5 index is 100. Sometimes on a bad day, on wintertime, even 300. Whereas the WHO standards for 2.5 is 25. But in Beijing, average is 100. So it's really causing people's health problem. I think that's the concern.
I have to point out that in this report over here, which
we all joined the whole
yes,
together on this.
This is recommendations for U.S.-China fuel co-op collaboration on fuel choice. And the focus of this report really is to look at things both from a U.S. perspective and a Chinese perspective. And the Chinese perspective very much is energy security plus, even more importantly than energy security, cleaning up the air. And one of the things that's pointed out in this report is coal-based transportation fuel cleans up the air in China. Now in Europe, coal-based transportation fuel, I'm sure, would be public enemy number one, right?
Yeah. No, but again, the situation is very different. I mean, we do have some very clear limits to the air quality in the city. So this is something that we cannot, and in any case, forget. So the clean air against PM, as you mentioned, PM 2.5, against NOx, against carbon monoxide, are given. So this is something that we cannot even discuss. So we start from a different situation. Of course, we do have also many, many cities in Europe that are still very much polluted. It's not true that we do not have air pollution problems. We do have many times where many cities in Europe that still go beyond the limit. So they have many steps ahead for us also to improve and this is one of the reasons why we need also to possibly have different policies for the introduction of advanced technology for transport, because transport is one of the key issues, the key source of pollution in the metropolitan area. So again, this is one of the key aspects for the future revolution, let's say the future low carbon transport policy in Europe. So how to adopt new methods, especially in highly density populated areas. This is something which we need to know, and we need to consider for the future development of sustainable solution. Definitely, air quality is something that is mandatory for us. It's not that we can forget it.
Now let me ask you, I don't view the current oil price environment as really low oil prices. I would think of it as moderate oil prices, because if we go back to, let's say, after 9/11, oil price was lower than it is today. Just that people have gotten used to much, much higher prices of oil. So in comparison, these prices look utterly benign. But what the lower prices mean is that public pressure to move to a fuel competitive environment, public pressure on the political system at least, has decreased. How does that impact your work and the way you think about these issues?
What we have since last year, we have a new directive on the alternative fuel infrastructure. It's I think in former times we spoke from the Clean Power for Transport, CPT directive. Now it's called AFID, and that we have to fulfill. Now, first of all, we have to give a plan to the Commission for next year. I think 16th of November next year, we have to give to the Commission our national plans, what we are doing in electricity, what we are doing in hydrogen, or yes, hydrogen, and what we are doing in LNG and CNG, in natural gas. And there we have time till 2020, 2030. And there we have to show our plans, what we are doing then, and there we have no chance. We have to go to Brussels, we have to present our plans, and then we have to change. We have to install a new infrastructure for those alternative fuels. And therefore, it doesn't matter with the oil price. We have to do it.
So you're saying that there's a clear long-term plan in place, really, that is immune almost to fluctuations in the price of oil?
Yes, and we have a plan till 2050, because then we have to we have in all metropolitan regions, we have to drive, or we have to do transport in the way that we have emission-free transport in all the metropolitan regions in Europe, and that we have to fulfill.
Yeah, if I may say, on top of what you said, that I fully agree, it's clear that in Europe we do have, and we want to have, a long-term strategy which is totally dislinked from the kind of fluctuation of petrol costs, because otherwise we would go back and forth every 6 months. So, for example, in the new energy union strategy, which of course encompasses also transport, we will now develop the so-called STRIA, so the Sustainable Transport Research and Innovation Agenda, which means that we want now to put forward all the alternative fuels, all the alternative possibilities, looking at all the difficult and all the different aspects. So infrastructure is one, because if you want to develop hydrogen or electrical vehicles, you need to have an infrastructure which doesn't exist. But it's not the only problem. Infrastructure is a problem. The second problem, of course, is technology per se, because as long as the electrical vehicles will cost as much as twice the normal cars, nobody will invest, unless that, again, you have special incentives, which can be financial, economic incentive, but also social incentives. As I said before, you can start to limit the emission in certain areas in the city only to some types of vehicles. And so there are different aspects, social, economic, technology, infrastructure, that we have to plan ahead with the long-term perspective. We cannot just go back and forth every single fluctuation of the fuel economy. So this is something which in Europe is now well planned ahead. We have a long-term target, the 2030 strategy. We have 2050, whereby we have the target to diminish the CO2 emission from transport by 60%. Now, so far it is simply enhanced, it never diminished so far. So it's a real difficult target and, let's say, commitment that we need to have very firm, without any hesitation, whatever, irrespective of what the oil market does.
So it really has to be effective, and you're thinking about other countries and other areas around the world, a plan has to be a plan for opening the market to fuel competition, has to really be put in place in a way that's almost immune to political pressures and to the day-to-day, one day oil prices may be high and people are very focused on it. When oil prices fall, the political system may be less interested, may have other priorities. It's very, very important to make policy that can withstand these kind of fluctuations.
And you must give your own example. For example, my minister is driving in Berlin a BMW E3. He has not one of these big ships like the S-Class or the Audi or the BMW 7. He is driving inside Berlin an E3, and that's enough for him. That's it. Or I normally take only public transport. I don't have a car in Berlin, for example, yes. And I take public transport or the bike, but not an e-bike, a normal bike.